In terms of farm profits in the last year or two, it's actually been, despite having a couple of pretty ordinary springs, the returns have been really good and above what we see long term. So we think 4 to 6% is achievable long term, but we've been seeing 6 to 8, some above 8, up near a 10 on some farms. In this sort of mixed farming region, our enterprises don't flip and flop too much. We very much take a long-term view of what's the best mix that's going to work over most years, and we look at the risks around that as well, and we try and then just stick with that. We might tweak it around the margins, but we don't change. Like for example, this year with declining wheat prices, we haven't changed our wheat area simply because you then muck up your rotation, you then have follow-on effects. So we think the most important thing to do is set your enterprise right, so it's the best thing you can do in the long term. Labour is always an issue. It's our single biggest cost in running a farm. In most cases, typical mixed broadacre farm, labour is our biggest cost. So we're always looking at to what extent can we replace labour with infrastructure? To what extent can we run another couple of thousand DSEs with the existing labour units? So what do we actually need to try and achieve that? So it's always a focus, and it's a combination of spending on your infrastructure. It's a combination of having the right farming system. So you don't want a labour-intensive farming system unless it's going to generate profit-intensive returns. And the third thing about labour is that we need to continue to invest in it. So we want good quality people who, not necessarily, well, at times certainly they have to work hard, but it's as much about thinking about things, using their labour sensibly, and getting smarter about doing things. We sort of can provide a bit of a career path for employees. So they might come on as a station hand, and then they might go to an assistant manager, and then they might say, well, I've learnt as much as I can in this role, I need to go to another job. And sometimes we can take them onto another farm. So we're a little bit different in the way our structure is compared to a family farm, because we do have opportunities for people to progress. The role of sheep in mixed farming, I think they're really important, and I think there's two key things that they do. One is they're a stabiliser of the business. So if you look at our returns from our livestock side of the business, or particularly the sheep, where we tend to have more in mixed farming rather than cattle, versus the cropping will on average be slightly more profitable, but it's a bit of a roller coaster. From year to year, it's quite volatile. If you look at the sheep returns, they're much more stable, but they are slightly lower, but not substantially lower that we would consider removing the sheep from the system and going wall-to-wall cropping. We see them as giving stability in income over time from year to year, unlike the cropping, which is a bit more of an up and a down. And secondly, we see them as being a major contributor to profitability, particularly where prices are at the moment. The complementarity between the livestock and the cropping systems has always been really strong. It's 1 + 1 = 3. And the stock are always benefiting the cropping system and vice versa. And we're getting better with our grazing crops, planting times, management, and all those sorts of combination of things that we're getting better at to get the best out of both systems. Opportunities coming along in the next 5 years, there's a few things that have changed. The good returns from the last few years are driving land prices up. So if you're in expansion mode, it's now much more of a challenge, because we've seen land prices move maybe 30% or something like that. Varies a little bit depending on where you are. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge, acquiring land and getting good returns, I think. Family farms have got an advantage. You can tack on the block next door and you get higher marginal returns because you don't need another tractor and all that sort of stuff. The opportunities, I think, for someone like us, is we can look further afield as well. We don't have to necessarily look in this region. And so not every region of agriculture in Australia goes well at the same time. Sheep, particularly the prime lamb story, I think continues to be a good story. And globally we're in a good position, with Australia and New Zealand between us being the major exporter of lamb globally. For the wool side of the story, I think there are substantial long-term challenges that we still haven't addressed. Rather than completely new technology, I think what we've done is built on other technology, and we're progressing in how better to use that at the farms. So precision farming, we continue to get better, and I reckon the real challenge is we've got a sort of tsunami of data coming, But the question is, what do we actually do with the data? How do we take it and make better decisions on the farm? And that's a real challenge. I think on the livestock side of things, I think the genetics still offers a really exciting opportunity, and as we go further and further down the path with genomics, I think that will offer new opportunities that were still there 4 or 5 years ago. But again, we're progressing, we're getting better, and that's why we do research, to try and answer the questions we don't have the answers to, and work out where they fit into the system. I think precision management in sheep and beef cattle is probably getting there, but we're still sort of trying to work out how to make it happen. And my view is that the biggest value is going to be when we can get mob-based information and start to then monitor that closely, collect it cheaply, because we don't want to spend a heap of time with labour. And then we're in a position to know what the mob is doing and what the tail end of the mob is doing, and make better decisions. Still, I think primarily it's going to be at a mob basis for commercial sheep farmers, rather than different story if you're a ram breeder and you need a whole heap of information. Individual ID is the way to go, there's no doubt. But increasingly what we're seeing is quite a few investors who want to come into Australia, buy a farm and just lease it back to an operator. And most of what we do, we actually manage it on behalf of the investor. So we employ the staff and do everything and make the business run. But increasingly there is interest in a buy and lease back model, or not necessarily lease back to the vendor, but lease to someone else. And so we're seeing interest in that, and I think that's a really interesting opportunity for Australian farmers, family farmers who want to expand, don't need to buy the farm, they can actually just lease the farm, so it reduces the capital threshold that they've got to get over to invest. And I think that trend will continue. I think there will be a challenge for family farmers to go out and raise money from a superannuation fund. The good family farms have huge advantages over a lot of other investors, be they small family farms that struggle, and they'll become more and more sort of off-farm income type things. But the larger scale family farmers got a lot of advantages. So they can be lean and mean, they can be very responsive, they can make decisions very quickly. They don't have to go upstairs, they don't have to send memos to head office or all that sort of stuff. So they can do things, get things done, respond very rapidly, and if they're making good decisions, they're very, very good businesses, and they're very hard to compete with. And so I see that in the long term, there will be, the larger family farms will still have a very big role in Australian agriculture.